Okay, so there's a couple things to talk about today. Just an issue that I was at least somewhat anticipated, just as part of the first run of the course. There's always little adjustments that need made on first time of course runs. We'll talk about that. I did send it out as an email instead of an announcement, kind of talking about related to the time deal on the first Pygame programming assignment. We'll talk about that here in just a second. And I sent it as an email, thinking we could maybe have individual conversations about it and stuff. And, in a class this size, unlike some of your other professors, I'm willing to, basically adjust assignments so that everybody works at their level, because some people have had more experience with game development than others. So that's why I sent that as an email instead of an announcement, so we could maybe have a conversation or something. But something that might need a slight adjustment, but related to the first round of the course. I also sent out an announcement regarding scholarships for women in STEM. You've probably heard about that in America. There's a big gender gap in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. And it becomes a big issue. So I don't like to make it to the end of the year without having a long list of things to say that I at least tried. So one of those emails was sending out a link to scholarships, and there's lots and lots and lots of them, because, well, it's a big deal. So people who have money, they want to do what they're concerned with it as well. So they do what they can to make sure that it's not finances that are keeping women out of the STEM field, any of the STEM fields. And well, this is Ivy Tech Community College. Community colleges aren't necessarily where rich people go. So one of the things I try to do regularly is send out lists of potential scholarships and stuff. So that's what that was. If you saw that, if you didn't see that announcement yet, on the announcement I sent out either Friday or Saturday, there's a list of like 21 scholarships for women interested in STEM fields. So money's available, and this is a community college, so not really a whole lot of rich people would go to community colleges. So money's usually an issue amongst our student body. So that's there. And I guess we'll jump into the other thing. Oh, and then we're going to talk about 3D graphics today. But first off, when reviewing the videos, I noticed I had forgot an important button, a checkbox to point out, because it's buried in menus. You also know how many menus and things there are there on Blender. So the checkbox that would export transparent images. So that way all we have is our animated character. Is the same way we did that the other day. When we look at a 3D character today, we can just set up a camera and take a picture of that and export an animation on the same button. And that's another way to get a 2D animation, by animating a 3D character, which some people find to be a lot easier to work with than the 2D thing. So we'll see that. And then an issue, that keyboard shortcut that I forgot, because, well, we'll talk about that when we get there. First off, there's something that I think might have been a slight time issue. Someone talked about a calculation that you may have heard in other classes, just the general calculation about what it means to be a full-time student. And these calculations are traditionally set up on 15 or 16-week courses. Here at Ivy Tech, it was 16 weeks, but a lot of colleges and universities would do 15 weeks of semester and then 1 week of finals, and the finals week schedules changed and everything, so that counted as something separate. But a 16-week schedule for the courses, that's the traditional. And 12 credit hours is what counts as full-time, which you probably know the words full-time from your jobs, and that's usually a lot more than 12 hours. So our calculation for that is say for a 3 credit hour class, 3 credit hours, we can expect to spend that much in lecture time in the classroom. So that is expected to break down into, I'll put lecture lab. All our subjects are different, and this is just the general take for all of your across college. It's about 3 hours in course in the classroom, which before moving to 8 weeks, most of the classes at Ivy Tech were scheduled an hour and 15 minutes long. And we can expect to spend twice that much on homework. 2 times on homework. So for like a 3 credit hour class on a 16-week schedule, spend 3 hours a week in the classroom, then 6 hours a week on homework, which sounds like a lot if you just say 6 hours or wait till the very last minute, but that's for a week. So an hour a day on homework sounds a whole lot better if we say it that way, like an hour a day, which means we're spending basically 9 hours per week on the class material. So that's our expectation. So generally we take our credit hour, the number of credit hours times the credit hours taken, and that's how we get full time. Then 3 credit hours, and if we're taking 12 credit hours a semester, spending 3 times the credit hours on each one. Instead of 3 there, I should write 1 times the number of credit hours in the classroom, and 2 times the number of credit hours. So 3 times that. So 36 hours a week is the general expectation on that. Obviously, some classes are going to be less. Some of the very intense classes might be a little bit more. And a couple years ago, Ivy Tech went to the 8-week schedule, which keeps the traditional math fairly straightforward. So for an 8-week schedule, we cut our number of weeks in half. So our full-time load, we would expect that to cut in half as well. So 6 credit hours is full-time. And then likewise, this would double. What used to be done in 2 weeks is now done in 1 week. So that's kind of how the expectation on where that carried through. So with that in mind, that's what I had in mind when I was putting together the homework assignments for this course. And this is the first time I've taught video game development course, so I wasn't exactly sure how the time would relate. And my original plan was to be a math teacher, and there's a very traditional thing passed down from teachers to students, and for those planning to be math teachers, that when you set up the homework and the test for math classes, double the amount of time that it takes you. So like if I put together a math test and it takes me 20 minutes to go through it, writing out all the steps, expect that to take the students 40 minutes. So it easily fits in a class period. So that's what I kind of went with when I was looking for tutorials. One of the things about game development is very time consuming. There's lots and lots of pieces involved, and the time really adds up. And it is not uncommon to see like a set of video tutorials for making a game that run like 20 to 30 hours and not even a super advanced game. That's like, so like the channel that I really liked and would have liked to have used for the Unity 2D tutorial coming up in a couple weeks. One of my favorite channels where we are using their tutorial for 3D stuff, but their 2D tutorial, they're very thorough and explicit about what they do in their video channel videos, but it is 34 15 to 20-minute videos for a 2D platformer, one level of 2D platformer. So it can be very time consuming, right? That is certainly not feasible for our classroom. And that's why a lot of tutorials are. It's not uncommon for video game development tutorials to run like 20, 30 hours of time. So when I was looking for those, like took me 3 hours. So I went with that traditional math measurement because I didn't have anything else to base it off of. It's like, okay, it took me 3 hours. Expect 6, but I want to stretch it out. So that's why it's a 2-week assignment. So that was anticipated to be about 6 hours spread over 2 weeks. But from what I was getting, it was taking a little bit longer than that, wasn't it? For some of y'all, how long did it end up taking? Do you have an estimate on it?
I know when I went through it took me, I'd say about 2-3 hours.
Okay, so
like the Python tutorial, yeah.
Yeah. So it was about 2 or 3 hours?
Around there, yeah.
Okay, I was thinking like 4 to 6 for the upper end. 2 to 3 isn't as bad as what I was worried about. But did it seem like way too much? There's also the goal for this class. Okay, yeah, and that was my intention. Mark put in there, he spread it out over a few days. I was intending for it to be spread out over a few days. That's why it was a 2-module. That's why they were all 2-module assignments, because not exactly quick. I don't want to be thorough with it. I didn't want to rush through it as quickly as possible, because there's 2 courses here, right? There's the SDEV 148 and SDEV 248. So here in 148, we're kind of introducing the tools and getting started with stuff. And then in 248 is just making games constantly. So in particular, I don't think there's a course shell ready for the spring one yet. When it gets a little bit closer, I was going to check for that, but I think I might have to put the shell for that together myself as well. If I'm going to do that, the book I'm going to use is, well, I believe it's been talked about. The book that was originally planned for use in this course, Cengage lost the rights to it and we couldn't use it. So then in a very, very short period of time, over about 3 weeks, I had to pick another textbook. So I went through a whole lot of video game textbooks very, very quickly. But the one I want to use for the spring semester is specifically titled Blender and Unity. So it is all just making models, 3D models in Blender, and then putting them into a 3D game. And it's a big book put together by large teams of people that were intending it to be used in a classroom. So they're not 30-hour projects like most of the ones we'd find on YouTube or something. So that course is all about making the games. This course, what I'm really concerned with is that you're somewhat familiar with the tools. So we've got a couple options if some of those tutorials seem a little overwhelming, which, yeah, I haven't made the final selection on the Unity tutorial. So I did go with the shorter ones there once we started, and kind of some of those time issues were starting to peek through. I did go use shorter as the final decision for the Unity tutorials. But the main goal here is familiarity with the tools. So a couple of the options are things like, well, obviously the stick with what's there. And I'm willing to adapt to things. So if you've already, dug around a little on your own and seen, work through tutorials online and feel like you have a basic knowledge and would just like to be challenged, I can find I can go that way as well. But I'm more worried about the people just getting started. So if you want to be challenged, let me know that as well. And we can definitely put together some interesting challenges in game development if you already have some experience with it. If you're just getting started and feeling overwhelmed, like those tutorials are too big, another option is I'm really just checking for the tools. So like when I taught the PHP class in last spring, our class example and the homework assignments were almost the same thing. It was based off examples, but it was different examples and slightly bigger. So like in class, going through the video game engines is now where we have user interfaces, which makes it a lot easier as well. That was part of starting out with Python, was do it in the script to make it, whenever we drag our mouse around and the software writes that text file for us and compiles it and runs it and everything from just the click of a button. It makes that so much nicer after struggling through all the typos and little error messages we get from the programming languages when we try to do it entirely in scripting. I was thinking that might make that look a little nicer, but we're really worried about the tools here. So another example might be taking our class examples and expanding them. So if we see like a player moving around, collecting coins, and we ran out of time with the fight game stuff, maybe include a mob, expand that a little, right? Add a couple more of the bad guys in the game, and then take those basic features, strip out the attack one to make some NPCs in the game, and start to put together a small story so that you're making your own thing, because then you're definitely learning the tools, just to demonstrate that you're learning the tools. And I started writing up a little list as like a poll and things, but with the size of our class, I think we could handle individualizing these assignments if needed. Right? So if you're new and feeling overwhelmed by the big tutorials, we find something that will help you not, hopefully make you feel not so overwhelmed. Because my goal, well, in general, I teach mostly software development courses. So obviously there's the goal of, once you learn software development good, so you can go get a good job and bring in those big paychecks. But I kind of feel that's important in our modern world. That is the oil of the 21st century. Knowing how to program computers and things is an important piece of knowledge. And that's how I feel about the game dev too. It's a school situation, so there's grades and all those technicalities that come along with it. But I'm more concerned with you learning how to make games, because that's why everybody took this course, right? You wanted to learn how to make games. So, and it can be lots. I have lots and lots of fun when I make games. So I want you to have this knowledge, and it's something enjoyable and it's beneficial. Here in a couple of weeks, our module topic is non-entertainment uses of games. Games aren't just for entertainment. There's other things we can use them for. Most of the games I write are little educational games. They end up being basically multiple choice quizzes. But instead of clicking the circle for option B, you go beat up the zombie whose blood trail spells out the right answer. It's not compatible with the big masterpieces, right? The big blockbuster games, but it's definitely more fun than the traditional multiple choice quiz, is my feeling on it. So it's not just entertainment things, but that's a module coming up soon. And I sent that out as an email instead of an announcement, so that we can kind of strike up a conversation, because it's not a very big class, and I'm willing to make little adjustments to fit where you're at, right? If you already know some game development, I can throw in some more advanced things and provide you a challenge and bump you up a level. But if you're new to game development, we can back things off and do the introduction level and bump you up a level from where you are. And that way everybody makes progress from where they started the course at in game development. But we can carry out those conversations personally, because it will be an individualized thing, right? This is not a very big class, and I have no problem with adjusting the homework to fit where you're at, so that whether you're starting here or starting down here, everybody gets bumped up with levels of the class as far as game development. But yeah, just respond to that email and we can strike up a conversation and figure out what needs to happen. Oh, otherwise with the school, it is a school situation, the technicalities and everything. I am required to turn in midterm grades after module 4. Today's the last day of module 3, so that's still a week away. But there's still some people that have some assignments you might need to get to me. I'm very generous with points. Y'all have probably noticed that now. Whenever I go grade stuff, I'm usually pretty generous with points. And when I see really nice stuff, I end up having to put extra credit on the nice stuff almost randomly because, well, it's not randomly because I do it when I see things that I'm really happy about because I'm so generous with the points. And when the really nice stuff compared to things that I did put all the points on, it's like, yeah, I don't have any way to show reward, to shell out rewards for the really exceptional work. So I tend to give extra credit a lot, just that might seem almost arbitrary because of that. I'm very generous, so please give me those assignments. That way I'll submit the midterm grades probably next Monday right after our class, which those don't affect your GPA or anything. That's really, it's more for the advisors, all the paperwork that your academic advisors fill out and stuff. So if that grade looks bad, if that grade's not so hot, you might get an email from the academic advisor, but it's the final grades that actually matter. Okay, so just some technicalities and just kind of respond to that email and we'll strike up a conversation and figure out what's best for each one of us because it's not a big class. And I think we can easily work that in and then bump, whether you're starting up here or starting down here, make sure everybody gets bumped up a level in game development knowledge. Right now, we're talking about some graphics. That's a big thing. And when you're developing, there's going to be teams, and part of the team are going to be programmers, and part of them are going to be artists. And art is an entire degree. There's an entire category of art degrees, right? There's lots of art degrees we can get at a school. So that takes a lot of focus, but for us here, we're looking at the programming side. So we want to at least be familiar with the art side. So I want to cover those. Does anybody have any questions before we jump into the example for today? Examples? Okay, and yeah, hopefully those tutorials aren't taking as long as what I was starting to worry. Andrew said it wasn't. It only took a few hours, and it's spread out over a couple of weeks. So, I guess the big thing is try to make sure you don't do those at the last minute. Because game development is a little time consuming, and one of the big time consuming parts is the graphical aspects. So I'm jumping here and kind of start with where we were last week. These down here, hopefully those will be out of the way there. So first off, two things from that file from last week. So I downloaded the file, class example. This one. Which, everything goes slower on the Zoom call. Hopefully it won't take too long to, oh, no, there it is. Okay, so we put this image in very quickly, gave it this skin of our image, a skeleton, move that around. And when we have vector graphics, which are a series of vertexes connected with lines, and when those lines come all the way around, make a closed shape, then we have a face. So vertexes, edges, and faces go together and the computer treats that as a math equation so that it can do things like manipulate it. We gave it a skeleton. This was a quick run. This would probably be deleted. One of the things was here in the back of the shoe, looks like the wrong bone is trying to grab the shoe there and they're stretching out. So we handle that with what's called weight painting. I'm gonna go back to the first frame, our original position. This is where we assign how much each bone affects each part of the skin. And in class the other day, I couldn't remember the keyboard shortcut. And it's a good example of, yeah, once I realized it, it's a great example of why the wonderful thing about open source software in particular. We're going to see this here in a few minutes, but in particular, Blender here is written in Python. And I know Python. So if there's not a shortcut for what I need, I can make one. If there's not a button there, it's open source, so I can just create the button myself. So it's probably a good thing that keyboard shortcut didn't work. That would have been even more confusing. And it led to a nice reminder about the power of open source software. If we don't have the button, we can make it. Because, well, for Blender, it's Python. So the problem here with this animation, I'll turn the skeleton back on over here, hit the little eyeball so that we can see it, is when it stretches out, it looks like this bone on what starts as our back foot is getting too much of the front foot. Oh, almost forgot. With 3D software, you probably want to have a regular mouse, the little mouse pads. All the functionality is there. There are options for this normal options for control clicks and control scrolls, alt scrolls, and those normal things to simulate a scroll wheel, but it's really not the same. So with graphics, I'll go ahead and just a tip to throw out here. I like to use both because this one, our up and down and left right can change, right? If the mouse gets tilted slightly, the up and down is now at like an angle on the mouse pad. And that does not happen with the little touchpad on the laptop. The X and Y's do not change with the laptop touchpad, so that can be nice for graphics. So to adjust those, we do what's called weight painting. So here in mode, nothing selected, and we don't have any options to change or anything. And then when we select, say, the skin, we see there's a bunch of different options. Weight paint's the one we want. And select the skeleton, and all we can do is edit or pose the skeleton. So both of them are involved in the weighting, like how much each bone's movement applies to a section of skin. So we want to select both of them, and to do multiple selections, you hold down the shift key, so select the first one. I'll select the armature first, and then hold shift and select the skin. And now we have the option for weight painting. And if you do that backwards, like select the skin, hold shift, and then select the bones, when you go up here, all we have are the modes we can set the skeleton into. The armature is the technical term. So armature and then skin, and that gets us to weight painting, where we see this blue, all this bluish stuff. And we can select bones by holding shift and clicking on one of them. So like shift and click on the vertebrae, and you see the colors up here. There's not really anything affected by that one. Hold shift and select this bone. You can see that arm is very, very red. So that bone right there is pretty much controlling the whole arm. So blue is dark blue, sometimes all the way to black, is completely released, and it's a fairly normal scaling. It goes from blue to red, the greens in the middle, and yellows and reds, and colors like get hotter for which bone it is. So our problems seem to be down here, like, so if I hold shift and select the foot here, we can see that it looks like this foot bone in the foot is controlling the correct foot, except it drifts over into this one. So to remove that, up here, there's this option for add that shows us different tools, like mix, multiply, or subtract. We probably want subtract in this case. Then I'll come down here and scroll in and hold shift and click the scroll wheel so I can get to that part that's a problem. With that selected on subtract, and go through here and remove all of that weighting that drifted over to the wrong foot. So that way this bone only affects this foot over here. Oh, I'm not clicking now. This bone only affects this foot over here, and it doesn't drag that trail down. The other one might have been messed up as well because those feet are awful close together, and that's what it judged it off of. Yeah, it looks like there's just a little bit here. We can, with it set to subtract, kind of color in there until all of the colors are gone from here. Then hold Shift and click to select the other one. And while erasing that, it looked like it added more. So if we need more, obviously just switch to the add brush and paint in the section where you want more added in. And that way, and you have to make sure basically that all of the skin is kind of held is affected by the right bone. Now if we play this, we don't get that strange stretching thing on the shoes. So that's an important one for 2 and 3D. And get back to the stop button. It looks strange here, so I'm gonna go back to object mode and turn off that armature so that we can do what we saw the other day and export that. But y'all might have noticed that when that exported, we missed, it had a solid background color. It exported with just like that neutral gray background to it. And we probably want transparent images. So to handle transparent images, I'll switch over to the animation tab. This is what we were doing the other day. We want to make sure our camera is all set up correct and stuff. So there's what the camera can see. That looks good. And here's most of our control menus. The orange square has our transform data. That'll be very important here when we get to 3D in about 5 minutes. The thing that's supposed to look like a printer, that has our output options. You might remember that goes over where we export the files to and things like that. We'll go to the delete file. I'll probably need a new folder here. A new folder called, I'll just call it chart. And then in there, call the file, the image character underscore walk underscore, and then there's lots of frames in an animation, so it'll just add numbers there at the end. So it's ready to export, but it would have that same background. Make sure we have the right frame set, the resolution, and aspect ratios. And then this button right here that's supposed to look like a camera, that one has our camera options. So different things about rendering and a whole bunch of camera options. So if you've had photography classes and stuff, you probably know you'll probably find a whole bunch of menus, things in this menu that you recognize from general photography. But on the camera menu, the camera icon menu under film is a checkbox for transparent. Then when we go up here and render our animation, and it spits out these frames, you can see that somewhat standard checkerboard background for transparent things. So looks like all those went through. So if I come over here to the delete folder, yeah, I guess in this view it's hard to tell they're transparent, but you can at least see they're not gray. And it took care of that thing where the skin was affected in the wrong spot. So 2 points on that skin thing. One, there's just a option menu up in the top left to switch between add and subtract. And 2 is a keyboard shortcut I couldn't remember. It's open source software. It's coded. If there's a feature that it does not have that you want, you can just add that feature using Python. Any questions about that? There's a couple things left off last week. is another way we can get 2D animations is to do a full 3D model, do a full 3D character, animate that, which some people find a lot more intuitive than trying to animate a 3D model, or sorry, than trying to animate a 2D model. If we could picture like a little doll that we're just putting into place versus a 2D thing where we're looking at a strange perspective and trying to keep it all straight in our mind. With a 3D thing, it's like a mannequin or a doll or the little art reference sculptures. We bend it around into place, and a lot of people find that a little more intuitive. Some come up here and do a new general file. I don't really need to save that. That animation wasn't really worth saving. That was a quick example. And let's get into talk about 3D stuff. So I'll grab my list here. Here's, once again, I put together a list to restrict myself. I've been using this sort of software for a long time, so I don't want to get carried away. Be like, oh yeah, here's a new feature. So restricting myself to just the basics here. So this is what it starts like. I'm going to delete all of this stuff and then reinsert it so that we can talk about it. So first off, so our main tools are right over here. So there's a selection box, so we can drag a box to select stuff. This cursor, this is a cursor so we can mark spots in the three-dimensional world. And put this over here or way up here and mark different positions in three-dimensional space for like inserting new objects and things like that. Or when I tried to click in the center, it went right to the edge of the box instead of to the origin where it started at. Probably undo and get it back there real quick. Control Z is undo, that'll be important. The arrows are for moving stuff. We can move things one at a time. Or if we grab that little dot there in the middle, just kind of wiggle it around three-dimensional space. One axis at a time. We obviously have a lot more control over doing that. Rotate things, I usually use a keyboard shortcut for that. It's just one of the first things we're going to point out. Scaling things, making them bigger or smaller, or transform data. All of the transforms at once, which is, I find a little overwhelming to try to work with. Every time I'm in this mode, I'll like try to grab the scale thing and accidentally grab the move thing on the same axis, or try to grab the scale thing and accidentally grab one of those rotation axes, and then the wrong thing's getting drug around. So just like programming in general, a tip that I believe I've mentioned in here is lots of small steps are better than few complicated steps. Small, easy steps, so probably better to do them one at a time. Here's a pencil so we can mark stuff, and measurement tools. We can like click a spot and drag over and get our actual measurements. By default, it's in meters. That can be changed and adjusted, but I was going to leave it in meters for now. Alternatively, we can manually type in our transform data. So if we want this to be at 0, 0, 0, and rotate it at say 45 degrees on every axis, we can just manually type that data in and get the precise values that way. Yeah, and then we just manipulate these things until we get this thing we want. So I'm gonna come back up here to the select tool. I'm gonna delete all this and reinsert new ones. Talk about those buttons. So there's a box select in 3D space, especially, or when things start to get crowded. I like the freeform selection myself. So your mouse is somewhere in the viewport area here. You can just push W, and notice that now that switched to a circle. So we can click things and select based off whatever's in that circle. Hit W again, and then you see the icon. Oh, I guess they call it Lasso. It gives us more of a freeform selection where we can just kind of drag around and select things in whatever shape we want. So I'll select all those and delete them, and then talk about them here individually. So I'm also going to move that cursor back to the origin. Maybe. Oh, that'll be fine. Where's that? I don't need to drift off. I was just going to point at the cursor because that can narrow down things. So we can select like the face of an object to insert another object on, or to say that to mark a point on our game object to specify where the origin of that object is, its local origin. Like, is a character, do we base our coordinates off the center of the character, like the center of mass of the character, or like the bottom of the feet, or is it the head of our character? Where do we want the origin, the local coordinates of that character to be based off of? And we can use the 3D cursor for that. But before getting into that, it's just inserting stuff. So up here we have different menus here in our view area. We can change the different cameras. So let's start with that. Under the add menu, there's the meshes. That's going to be our shapes. The armatures are skeletons. We kind of saw a little bit about meshes and shapes with 2D stuff. And then down here we have cameras and lighting. So that's something we need in the 3D world. With 2D, it's kind of implied what angle we're looking at it from, because it's two-dimensional, so we're always going to be looking at straight on. And it's implied where our light is. We assume the light is also going straight on the two-dimensional thing. But with 3D, we have to actually define these things. So you see that the 3D cursor was there, so when I just hit add a camera, it put it right to that where the 3D cursor was. I'm going to select the move ones and kind of move that to off to the side somewhere. And scrolling in and out, clicking the scroll wheel to move around, shift and click to pan. We often have to change our view a lot. It's just something to kind of, you'll want to practice around with it. And I'm going to want to make sure there's plenty of time to practice with it today. So got to set up the camera, and we can go to view and camera, active camera to see what the camera is looking at. And then we have keyboard shortcuts for these. In particular, rotation and scale are very useful. So it's R and S. So if we push R, we can just kind of start rotating our camera. And if we know what we want, we can hit the axis name. So R, and then either X, Y, or Z. So like R and Z. So now I can only rotate it around the Z axis. So it like restricts it to that particular axis. Or rotate X, and it can only be rotated around the X axis. It's probably hard to see from that view. Let me go back to the regular view, under view, active camera gets us out here. So we'll push R and Z, and see the only rotation to make is around the Z axis. Or R and X, and the only rotation that's allowed is around the X axis. So restricting it and doing it one axis at a time can be very, very useful. It's kind of hard to set that camera in place until we have an object in front of it, but that's what you would do, and just go to the viewport and make sure your camera's looking at the right thing. Which I started with that, but obviously that's probably a better thing to do last, once we have all our details worked in and we know what we're pointing the camera at. And just those steps, just rotate it and move it into the position you want, and make sure the camera is looking at the right thing from the angle you want. And again, in 2D, it's implied that the light is coming straight on. But that's not the case in 3D. We have to define where our lighting is. So light, and I'll just do, so we can either do a point light, kind of like a laser shining on something, and then whatever reflects off of it illuminates other stuff. Do a sun, a typical spotlight that kind of comes out like a cone, or just kind of a ambient light, and generally no direct source in where we're at, but kind of like the way that a room with all the curtains drawn is still lit up in the daytime. Right? There's no direct light in the room, but we can see fine from the ambient light just spread around the area. Let's do a sun one. And again, we just move that. It's kind of focused straight down here. Maybe if our thing's going to be placed at the origin here, we want to like afternoon lighting. So kind of move that in place. Often a good idea to have lights behind the camera somewhere, but it just depends on how you want the shading done. And then we can do R to rotate it so that it's pointing the way we want it to. So we say like RX, so rotate and then restrict it to the X-axis and get some sort of like angle for the sunlight coming out of the sky. Likewise for RZ, and drag our mouse around till it points. So we get it pointed roughly at the angle we want. Let me get that cursor out of the way. Well, there's one more thing to add, then I'll move the cursor out of the way. So the camera and the lights mostly just move and rotate. Choose the sort of light you want. Then we have more options over here. Like if I select the selection, select the camera, which is camera selected. So the orange box here, that holds our transform. So location, rotation, and scale. So that's one you're going to want to use a lot. Camera properties are up here. So if you've had, like if you know a lot about photography, things like your occlusion and all your controls for setting bloom and all of that stuff is under the icon that looks like a camera. For starters, you're probably just going to want to stick with the transform data and move and rotate your camera into the place to take the picture you want it to take. Same thing with lighting. And when we click on light, the icon down here that looks like a light bulb has our light options. So what type of light is it? What color is it? Do we want to do like a blue wash of light, or just keep some central bright light, or different lighting options? How bright is it? How intense does it reflect? What angle does it come from? Lots of options, but for starters, probably just stick with the transform data and then move to that and experiment with things as needed. And experimentation will go a long way to make sure there's plenty of lab time today. So Control Z is undo. That'll be an important one. Or main menu has an undo button as well. And Control Shift Z is redo. So a good place for one of those things of just trying things and see what happens. Now let's actually add a thing in. Add a mesh, and start with the cube. And well, we got our camera and light in place. Those we don't need to see once they're in place. So over here in the top right, we can see all of our stuff. There's different collections of objects. So we're going to work with our meshes now. So we don't really need to see the camera or the light. They're there. But if I kind of scroll around that thing, you'll see it looks about the same everywhere. And there's some shading, but when I turn and look at that, it's that way as well. And I'm going to come, once again, the orange square has our transform data. So I'm just going to type in 0, 0, 0 to get that back to the origin. Get that back there, and then I'm going to move the 3D cursor way out of the way somewhere. I don't think I need that again right now. Because sometimes, yeah, that thing does just seem to be in the way or insert stuff at the wrong spot. But it marks, it's like a marker, a little flag that says where we want to work at in our 3D space. So as I turn it, I don't really see the effects of that lighting. And that's these buttons right over here. Well, you can see the crosshairs. We can turn it here just as well, or click one of these icons, one of the ends of them to look straight at a certain edge. Or right above them, though, we have different ways of viewing our objects. We could view it as a wireframe and turn off all our faces so that we see the corners and the edges connecting our vertices. And just build in faces and kind of get a sense of it. And the next one is viewport shading. So here you'll notice that this is, let me turn back to the original position. Or turn the light back on. I turn the light back on, you see the sun's coming from this angle, so these sides over here are illuminated and these sides are shaded. The other one is rendering, which there's no material. So rendering doesn't do anything right now. That one might slow things down. So if you want to see the shadows and stuff, use this. And to generally in working, we just use the shade, the normal shading or wireframe, depending on if we want to see the faces or the edges. Which one are we focused on? This will show the shadows, and this will show the final, what the final version is going to look like, but that might run slow at times. So typically we don't work in that, and we have to define materials. So it's not like 2D graphics where we can just say blue. We have to say it's blue, non-metallic. It doesn't reflect a lot of light. It has a very rough surface. So we have to define all these things explicitly. But for starting with, just working with our shapes. What time is it? 1:53. So I'll turn this off. And to work with our shapes, basically we just manipulate those vertexes, edges, and faces. So oops. With our object selected, well, not that. Control Shift. Oh, can't remember which button I was trying to push there. There was a menu that I can turn that, get that out of the way. So I was going to try to. I'm not going to worry about it. So with our object selected, to modify that, we can go in edit mode, and you see here we can see each one of our vertices and all our edges and all the faces. And then we just kind of move them around to get the shape we want. So for different selections, I'll start up there right next to where we went into edit mode. There's we can select by vertex, by edge, or by face. So if we select a face in face mode, we can click on one of the faces to select it. And hold Shift to do multiple selections, and Control to undo this. Control click to undo the selection. So yeah, kind of clicking and choosing different ones. Same thing with edges and vertices. So like if I hold Shift and select all these edges, notice that face highlighted. So select all the edges, or select each one of the vertexes in order to select the faces and edges related to it. And then we have our move, rotation, and scaling features as well. Scaling does a lot more on edges and faces than it does on vertex, because the vertex is just a single point. We can't really scale a single point. Well, then we just move them around. We'll move a vertex around and the edges and faces will follow it. Before I do that though, here in a cube, that's not many edges and faces to work with. So I'm going to select it, and to select all is just A. You don't have to push any extra keys with it. Just hit A, and that will select everything. A for all, and then we can right click, and this very top option is Subdivide. Lots and lots of options. But if we go to Subdivide, it kind of splits every one of those faces in half. And down here in the lower left, you'll notice a little box popped up, a little menu talking about the subdivide. So every time we do something, we'll get a little menu down here. When we move things, we'll see a menu down here. When we rotate them, and then we can go in and type the numbers. So, okay, I want to cut that more than in half. I don't want to need more vertexes than that to make a nice shape. So maybe subdivide it by 5 and get a number of vertexes, a whole bunch of little faces and vertexes to work with. And then we'll just kind of go around and select the parts we want. So I like the freeform selection for this especially, because I want to move the vertexes and the faces. So if I just grab some random vertex and stretch that out, you'll see everything kind of came with it. All the faces around it adjusted and the edges came out. Or we can grab several. And once all the vertexes around a face are selected, the edges and that face associated with it will be selected. Kind of move that out in groups and just make little adjustments until it kind of looks like what we want it to look like. I'm going to do something after break. I have something in mind that I'm going to try to make a little model and talk about that stuff. But I was going to take a break about, I was thinking 205. So just a couple little things here and we'll see all this again. Another thing we can do is, I'll just select a face here, is just grow another shape out of that face, which we call an extrusion. So we want to extrude it, and that's the one we use most often. We'll start with our basic shape, get some vertexes and edges in there, and then to make a particular face grow, instead of just moving it, well, first off, I'll just move this one. You can see all the ones around it came with it. So then I'll select this other face and extrude and just kind of grow another face out of it. Notice that the other stuff didn't come with it. I made something new out of it. So 2 ways to modify the things there. And then, yeah, with that face selected, you can use the move tools or rotate maybe around the Z-axis to give us something twisted, kind of twist it a little. Scale it, make that face small so it comes down to a point. And that's basically the tools we have to work with. I have something in mind that I'm going to try to do after a quick break and kind of make a full image. And we're also going to talk about this data. Okay. Oh, nice. One other thing on my list of, so we saw the subdivide. That's one of our really useful ones. Another one is maybe I want some vertexes here to work with. Along with that, a very useful tool is the knife tool, where we can just kind of cut into things. So we push K, we get this little knife, and then we can snap to one of our edges and drag that around and like that, that'll work. And hit enter, and now we have a bunch of, it cuts edges in there. So I go back to vertex selection, see every one of those edges, every time our knife crossed an edge, it gave us another vertex to work with. Then we can select those, select some vertexes, hold shift to select them, and E to extrude something out of that. And then again, maybe rotate X so that our next extrusion comes out at a different angle. And combine those tools to location, rotation, and scale to get every face and vertex, all the vertexes and edges connecting those vertices, and faces filling in the spaces in between to the spot we want. And then with our selection tool, once again, see it's set for a box select, because when we changed that earlier, it only changed in object mode, but the W key will change that here as well. To toggle through and get the freeform selection and then select a bunch of vertexes at once. And select the move tool, and then I can just drag those vertices out and make. You notice that the other parts kind of came with them to fill them in, like we already saw. And that's basically how our 3D modeling software works. With the similar thing we saw the other day with vertexes, edges, and faces, we just have multiple dimensions of it now. And we also have a camera and lighting we have to include, but then we just adjust, kind of like connect the dots. We set up our vertex where the vertexes need to be, and we'll draw edges connecting all those dots and fill in any spaces. You connect the dots, paint by number sort of things. You'll probably have some of those coloring books when you were little kids, right? Where the lines aren't even drawing. You have to draw the line, connect a bunch of lines to dots, and then fill in the different shapes with the appropriate color. One thing I like about this tool, the lasso select, we don't necessarily have to have the entire thing, it just has to touch it. So if I want to select like part of this row, just grab the lasso and just drag down. And I don't know if it's coming up in the video very well there, but just drag down and over just a little bitty bit. So it's not surrounding them, but it still selected every one of those spaces that it was, that it touched. And you do have to go down and over just a little bit to include some sort of width to the selection. But then that gives a nice, quick, easy way to select a bunch of faces, and it's just going to select the ones it touches. So usually I work mostly in vertex and edge selection. Those are the two big ones. So one other thing before we take a break here is mention colors. I'll go ahead and color this shape. This is just kind of random movement, but we use those tools to put all those vertexes, edges, and faces where we want it. Once we get them, we'll go back to object mode so that it's one solid shape again. If we want some colors, that is over here on these icons. This is the icon for it. I guess it's supposed to look like a sphere partially colored in or something, shaded or something. I always think it looks more like the radioactive icon than anything else. But that round circle with some colors on it near the bottom, that is it's our colors, the materials. So it's more than just a color. So if I add a new one, you can see it gives it a name. So we're going to intermingle. We're going to have lots of materials. So we can click on it and rename it. Choose from a list of all the ones we have, which there's only one thing there right now. But as you add more materials, that'll kind of grow. What sort of surface is it? We define that, different things. Base color, we'll just start with this for our basics. Maybe we want this random shape to be green. So we can select that, change the brightness of it, lots of control. RGB, red, green, blue mix, use saturation, and volume, I think. I'm used to HSL, which is use saturation and luminosity, like how bright it is, but it kind of means the same thing, whatever we call that last one. And it's RGBA, which includes the alpha value, so that also has some transparency to it. So bring that down. So alpha of 1.0 is completely opaque, and alpha of 0.0 is completely transparent. So usually we find some mix in between, and then we can layer stuff. But we have to define other things like how much of our, what's the subsurface made of, and how much does it show? How rough is it in each of our 3 dimensions? What color is the surface underneath? Layer things up. And then options like this, metallic. Metals reflect a lot of light. So if we want, so that is part of the reflection thing. Specular, specular kind of relates to how the reflected light is changed. Like, is it like looking at a mirror in direct sunlight where it's the bright light shining right back at us, which will be fully metallic and fully specular? Or is it like the paint on a car with a little bit of dust on it? It's definitely still metal and very reflective, but it's not the same as a mirror reflects. Roughness, how rough is the surface? Is it super smooth, very rough? We have to define all these things, and there's more control we can get over them. So for starters, probably start with just a base color, and maybe over time add in the metallic and roughness would be the next 2 things. But for starting messing around with it, just add some color, and that's your base color. Then to see it, we have to be over in our shading, viewport shading. You see it adds the color, and the sunlight's still coming in, so we have shadows and stuff in different angles, and it looks like that. So a little bit more than 2D graphics, but hopefully that'll get you a start. And I'm going to go through making an actual thing after the break. I did a couple of practice runs, and I got something in mind that I think will kind of flow together nicely and give a good example of this. And we're going to talk about the data of how this data is stored, because those extra little bits that we saw in SVG graphics, those are nice for 2D format, which internal to the machine, it doesn't matter how many dimensions we have to our vectors. The machine doesn't care. They're all the same on the inside. But we want to be able to work with this in our code, right? So we also need a human readable form. So for 2D, what's pretty much become the standard is SVG graphics, SVG format that we saw the other day. But the lighting and the camera and the angles and all that would really, really clutter up a markup language. So we have a different format for our 3D stuff that we will look at right after a short break. Does anybody have any questions about that general process though? So for every vertex, edge, and face in there, we use our transform controls, location, rotation, and scale of that particular element until we build that up and make the shape we want. Any questions? I assume the silence means no questions then. Does 10 minutes sound good to everybody?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll get back to it at 2:20 and talk about the data, see an actual shape instead of some random things there, and then should have lots of lab time. I'll see you in a few minutes. I'm go get a drink of coffee.